Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1177th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Lisa Alvarado and Ksenia M. Soboleva. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Lisa Alvarado is an artist and musician based in Chicago. Her practice gravitates towards creative traditions of overcoming and exuberant forms of resilience, and her perspective is rooted in the underrepresented American history of the Chicanx Mexican American diaspora. She plays harmonium in the band Natural Information Society and uses her free-hanging paintings as mobile stage sets for their performances. And our host today, Dr. Ksenia M. Soboleva, is a New York-based art historian specializing in queer art and culture. She holds a PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU with a dissertation on art, AIDS, and lesbian identity in the United States. Soboleva is currently working on a book titled Friendship as a Way of Art, Queer Identity and Visual Citation, and co-editing with Svetlana Kito the first major publication on the lesbian gallery trial, Bloom. She teaches at New School and NYU, and we're so lucky to have Ksenia as a contributor and host regularly for the Brooklyn Rail. And over to Ksenia to get us started, with gratitude to Ksenia and Lisa.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you to the entire team at the Brooklyn Rail for making this possible. It's always a pleasure. Thank you to everyone who's here with us. And of course, thank you to Lisa for joining me. I'm so excited to have you here, even if virtually. And I had the pleasure of witnessing your show and performance on Friday, which was beautifully done with the Natural Information Society during sunset in the magnificent space that is the temporary kitchen. And, as I was sitting there and the sun was leaving and the light was shifting and it was creating all these different patterns in the space. And I gained a new understanding of what you mean when you refer to your work as vibrational aesthetics, because both the visual and the sonic landscapes were creating movement in the space. And I really I really found myself wishing that that I could recline on fluffy pillows and not those plastic chairs, and fully immerse myself. So congratulations on a beautiful show, Lisa. And I wanted to start by asking you how you first became interested in this relationship between sound and visual.
Hmm. Yeah, the works in the show are coming off of an ongoing series of free hanging pieces that I've been using as mobile stage setting for Natural Information Society. Kind of thinking about making inclusive space, but also thinking about textiles and liminality and transformation. Um, the series kind of, got started by me switching from working on stretchers to working on free hanging painting. And it kind of arrived from a time where I was done with school and I went back home to San Antonio, Texas. And I started to notice all of the just sort of visual objects that were all around me all the time, and the landscape and how that was influencing what I was making. But yet I didn't think of any of those objects or histories to really be art forms. And I realized that I wasn't taught in school anything about the history, the visual objects and the visual history of that area, and really just of the Americas. um, I realized that the art canon that I had been taught left out objects that had any functionality to them. And in particular, I noticed the abundance of textiles, like sarapes that are, all over the restaurants in San Antonio, worn as a poncho by my mom in the winter. folded on the side of a chair or bed in a family home. Like these textiles I was always seeing, and I really didn't think of them as an art form. Um, so at that time, I started to really think about that sort of functionality of a work and how these limitations of categorization just leaves out so many visual objects, so many histories, so many people. Um, and I wanted my work to connect further with that. Um, so at that time, it was like 2009, 2010. I started to work on free hanging canvas, and it gave me so much freedom. The stretcher was bulky. I had to look at the same piece on the wall all the time. It was harder for me to even, create the stretchers without access to a wood shop. um, I started to feel like a certain freedom from working on the unstretched canvas. I could make the piece any size, could be more immersive. I could take them off the wall and roll them up and put them away where I didn't have to look at them anymore. Or I could unroll them and bring them into any situation, any room, any time. Um, and I wanted to connect further to textiles and those histories that they recall. I felt like there was a more inclusive sort of historical framework that I, as a Mexican American artist, could fit into that and the histories that I'm coming from. Um, it was also like a time where, I was living in a very musical household. My partner and I were collaborating with music. He's making like soundtracks and working in several different bands. We would do many recordings in our home and rehearsals. And I started to see that sort of musical community and that musical life bridging into the work that I was doing. I started to see people walking in front of the pieces, or just in rehearsals, I started to see the work with the people. And I realized that, in my work for so long, like everything I was making, I had this sort of rhythm or movement and pulse that I was always interested in, even if I didn't understand where that was coming from when I was a younger artist, and maybe I questioned that, like, why does it always need to have this thing? I think it was just something that I paid attention to a lot as a child, and I gravitated towards. And at some point, I understood that as my language. That's kind of the way that I express what I make. And so I started to see these relationships so much between sound and movement and vibration, but also in textiles, just like learning about textiles and thinking about how they can be forms and expressions that talk about time, that have these sort of cycles and repetitions, like the day and night cycle, or the cycles between years, or menstrual cycles, or moon cycles, these repeated sort of opposites that are always in relationship. So those notions of cycles of time, sound, textiles, they all started to come together in my work. And I was just embracing that sort of liminal space of textiles, and that in between sort of space of like, what does it mean to like make these pieces that are talking about these sort of artifacts or like objects of tradition. Um,
Mhm.
and I wanted to use them further in my life and connect to functionality. So I didn't want to wait for an invitation or anything like that. I just wanted to take the work with us, and I started to bring them to music venues and put them into the space of the performance. And it was, that was really exciting for me because the work started to gain these sort of layers of history and experience through being a part of that community. And just having absorbing that history in those moments of time. Um, and I started to see them as environments, like creating these sort of spaces. where people could be within these transient sort of spaces where you could roll it up and unroll it in any space. And they could bring us to some kind of different imagined place. So sorry, I'm going on forever, but
No, no,
just to
no.
give you like a background on how that came to be.
Yes. And this idea of the liminal spaces is something that you return to over and over again. And that that very intentional gesture of suspending the works from the ceiling, right? Free hanging paintings also breaks free from painting's traditional position on the wall, and it changes both your and the viewer's um, physical awareness and interaction with the work. And I remember seeing your works at the Whitney Biennial, the 2022 Whitney Biennial. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the title of those pieces also referenced the word for in-betweenness. And and I'm curious how this in-betweenness, this liminal space, also shows up differently um, when you work across different media, or when you're engaging in performance, and also um, even before you were even before you were uh, making art. How did this idea of in-betweenness show up in your life? Because to me, I think it also relates to the migrant experience of being in between, right? Being in between countries, being in between communities, in between traditions.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Thinking about like just when I was a child, I mean, I've always been interested in nature, and I remember being like a really little kid, just being so obsessed with knowing how did the night turn into the day. I knew how the day turned into night, but I didn't know how it happened on the other end. And sometimes I would wake up really early as a little kid, and then it would be kind of dark, and then I would be doing stuff, and then I would look and it was light, and I didn't understand why I didn't see like the big bang of light or like just whatever happened to make that change. And so I used to try to force myself to wake up at different times or make promises to myself to like, okay, you're only going to sleep for a little while, then you're going to wake up. And sometimes I wake up too early and be waiting around, and other times I wake up too late. But I remember once I found out that it was the same thing as the sunset, just in reverse. That was so interesting to me. And I became really interested in that, like that sort of transient moment where like the daylight and the night kind of meet and touch, and you have all of the like gradations of colors that are, coexisting and being visible in one moment. So I think that in between is like where those two opposites or differences touch and meet has always been interesting to me within nature. But yeah, as a cultural experience, like I was talking about before, there are so many things that I was familiar with that maybe, going down the line in school and just from teachers and different people, like they didn't really understand what I was going through or what I was talking about. Um, and over time, I started relating that to the in-between experience of invisibility, really. Um, I always heard about certain stories from my father of the past. um, I guess that's where I was like relating into the photos that I have in the work, um, in the set of works at the show. They come from my mother's photo archive, and they're taken from around the time of Mexican repatriation, which is 1929 to 36. It was a huge mass deportation of people, mainly of Mexican descent. At that time, my family on both sides had lived in the South Texas area since before Texas was annexed into the US. So they were US citizens. However, my dad's family was deported at that time. And it may have been because they had a little farm, like they had land. Um, so they had to leave everything behind and live in Mexico, and only to be solicited a few years later to come back and work in the US as migrant farm laborers under the Bursetos program, which was a labor program that started in 1942. Was ultimately just a scam. So my father, just growing up, I heard his stories about just being a child traveling from one place to another, having to pick cotton and fruit and, make little to nothing. Just thinking about repatriation in this moment right now, at that time, they deported almost 2 million people. And I've seen it written where they took away like 60% of those people were American citizens. So it's just felt like an important story to recall at this time to remind people of that sort of cyclical relationship with history and this amnesia of how we forget these things that have happened in the past and how they reoccur now.
Mhm. And how do you navigate representing this historical trauma uh, in the present moment with with the current state of US politics? And I imagine that you probably started working on this before the election. And um, how has that been?
I think about relating to a lot of different notions from different angles. This sort of like stereotyping and demonization has been going on for a long time. Um, in particular with these photos, I wanted to relate back to the overall of how I was treating the show and thinking about the sort of the sort of layers of memory and time and how they live within us and how we recall them in these sort of segments. So I have these like double images and kind of like the color relating back to how time and memory might come back to us. But I wanted to show like people living in the United States at this certain time, where many people kind of think that maybe, there were not people of Mexican descent living here at the time, and to show a different sort of view of people, not doing crimes or, just being like human beings living in this space, having families and homes and practices, in this area of the world. I wanted to relate it back to that. So, overall in the show, I was thinking about the light in the space of the Westbeth and how it has this sort of always moving, always changing, this transitory sort of shadows and shapes on the ground. And I was using a lot of translucent fabrics to create these sort of soft intersections in the space, to think about like a physical liminality or in-betweenness, and those colors that would come through from those translucent fabrics were like in these like strips or lines. So I was thinking about doubling with that with the photos. Um, and the window design also does that, like this design of like really sharp diamonds that's like right in the center of the space, and how it projects throughout the day and kind of like changes, what it's hitting, where it's coming, how long the shadows are, depending on the time of day, the time of season, the weather, etc. Um,
Mm.
So I was thinking
Did you
about
study?
these other forms of liminality. Sorry.
Mhm. No, 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 please, please. I was going to ask whether you studied the light at the kitchen before installing the work and whether the ways in which the light fell and moved through the space then informed the installation.
I noticed it, and I saw it one way when I went one time, and then seeing images of it, because I don't live in New York, I couldn't go several times, but seeing images and seeing the shadows looking completely different than what I remembered and what I photographed, and just knowing that it always had that change. I could see the sort of shapes from the outside, the architecture of the outside of the building has like a roundness. I could see this like round shadow everywhere in the space. And I've never done a window design before, so it was a completely new thing for me. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. The shadows and the light like changed throughout the day and throughout the course of my time with my work in the show they're going to be different all of the time. Sometimes they were reflecting on the backs of the works. Sometimes it would go all the way to the back wall where the photos are. So it's kind of like everything was touching and being projected onto each other. And, that was really interesting to me.
Mhm. It was so wonderful hearing you talk about this curiosity you had of how night becomes day, because I myself grew up in northern Russia in Arkhangelsk, and we used to have white nights when it never fully got dark. And I remember being so fascinated by that as a kid and sort of
Mm,
feeling like I was cheating time. And it felt like one long day. Um, which
mm.
brings me to the title of the exhibition as well, Shape of Artifact Time, and the titles of the pieces. How did you arrive at at this title?
I was thinking about like seeing that light. I was thinking about time shapes. The shapes of the light, like something coming from outside in. And I was also thinking of those kind of time shapes that happen on a slower time frame, not just over a 1 day and night cycle, but over a very long, like generational cycle, like within the ground. So I started to think about like changes and shapes that come from in outward. So the two largest paintings, like this one, and one of the other ones that's across from it they have this mirroring composition where one is it's coming from within up, it's like ascending, and then the other one is descending, where it's like the composition is like coming from the top down. They also kind of create the space, like demarcate the space of the performance. Um, but I was thinking about those kind of inner transformations that could happen in that movement that happens from within. And in these pieces, there's like this new thing that I have been doing of sewing directly into the works. I know it's hard to see in these photos, but all the like patterning, the like lattice of the piece is all made from trims and fabrics and fringes that I've been collecting over time.
Mhm.
I've always
Mhm.
put them on the edges to kind of connect with textiles. And I've just loved like fabrics whenever we're on tour or looking on eBay. I'm just like always need to check out the thrift trim or fabric, especially like anything handmade or home like hand sewn. And I've just been accumulating and accumulating these pieces, and I wanted to bring them back into the work. So I sewed directly into the pieces, and then I paint on top of them. And they kind
Mhm.
of create these sort of like what I what to me kind of makes me think about like fossils or like the texture like of rocks or topography. And
Mhm.
I was thinking about these like time shapes and how time leaves its impression on materiality as these sort of forms of change. And once I started putting all of this together and painting on top of it, also started to recall to me this notion of rasquache,
Mhm.
which, also thinking about the photos and thinking about this demonization of people and culture, I wanted to like elaborate more on these sort of notions and concepts that were around me that I'm coming from that I know are internalized and within my approach to painting. Where squache means leftover, and it started as a kind of like negative term, but inside of the culture where people would call each other that based on their aesthetic choices of like how they would put things together in like different contexts outside of their home, inside their home, or in the car. And it was kind of a way to say that somebody like had bad taste or was like lower class in some way. And in 1989, it was written about by Tomás Ibarra Frausto, who is also grew up in San Antonio, where I'm from. And I heard him talk about it. He said he was inspired by this particular restaurant and like the decoration and the colors in there called Mi Tierra, which I had gone to, countless of times as a child and an adult. And he kind of wrote about it as this makeshift survivalist aesthetic of reusing things in different contexts, creating new juxtapositions and hybrids through addition and an unrestrained sort of color and boldness. And, it's just one of those interesting terms that started out as negative and then becomes embraced later and reclaimed. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and yeah, I'm interested in that kind of transformation of different concepts that usually start to like point out a particularity within a people from themselves that might be pointing out something negative and used to kind of to impede like creativity or impede motion or movement or the flow of energy. It kind of like gets someone stuck in a certain like self-negativity. And then at some point there's um this like change. And I love that sort of like alchemy of opposites, how they can just like one thing can mirror into its complete opposite and change into something that creates movement and motion and imagination and growth and self-love and self-care. Um, and I've been thinking about how to write about that and connecting it to like the processes of metamorphic recrystallization that happens in rocks and kind of like calling it recrystallized energetics, where something that has like a static and negative form like transforms into something that creates movement, motion, and energy. And so, yeah, I gravitated towards this idea of Rasquache as being a way that people can renew their living space and create some kind of spirited territorial our spirited like way, like DIY way of like changing their territory and their space and having like an ownership over that. And
Mhm.
feeling like it reflects more of their own like history and vibe versus, some kind of Home Depot or KB Home feeling. Um, and so yeah, I
And
relate
also,
to that a lot through like house paint.
mhm.
What's that?
And I think also for me, it highlights how people exist across different value systems, right? And
Mhm.
I think I read that your grandmother was a seamstress, and my great aunt who I lived with as a child was also a seamstress, and I remember any scrap of fabric left, nothing would be thrown away. It would be sewn together into, a tea towel. And then when I moved to the Netherlands at a young age, these things were thrown away. And I realized that I was now in a country where most people existed in an entirely different value system, right? They had a different value system. And the same now whenever I step outside of the bubble of my queer community, right? It's like there is a whole society out there that exists according a different value system. And I think that's something that we're really witnessing now, right? What value systems are prioritized and how there is an ironic hierarchy of different value systems.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know where I'm necessarily going with that, but
Yeah, but
but
I
I,
love that idea because there seems to be like this overarching one, like supposed value you're supposed to have, like within a country or culture or whatever. And there's something empowering of breaking out of that and taking it into your own hands to kind of feel out where you want to be and how you want to approach things. And yeah, so that's interesting.
yeah. And I think that, even in terms of um, textile now being considered a fine art, right? And seeing the art critics who are upset by that, right? And who are sort of rebelling against even the value systems within the art world changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
I
Where something that was outside becomes inside and back and forth.
yeah. Or there is this like backlash right now against identity politics, right, in the art world. And there was that article by Dean Kissick that many responses have been written to that article, but basically this claim that there's a there's so much boring art right now, and it's because it's about identity politics, when actually there's always been a lot of bad art and boring art, and it's always been about identity. It's just that historically that identity was white and male and straight, um, and now it's expanded and it includes many different identities, right? So, um, yeah, that's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I always saw that growing up where it was kind of a way to put certain people down that were talking about their histories if they were not coming from the same, European sort of canon or whatever, that they were overly speaking about, their family or their history or their identity. And it always would strike me that they believed somehow that what they were doing or what they were talking about or creating had nothing to do with their identity. And when I would look at their work or read their writing, it was very much coming from certain histories and certain roots, certain ways of growing up, certain, structures that, were coming from, this sort of overarching American, white, European, like you were explaining earlier, and that is an identity, I think is like hard for people to understand because it's so seamless and invisible within everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even during feminism, right, in the 1970s, um, so many so many critics in the art world were trying to shut that down because it was too emotional, it was too personal, right? And really, it was just a way to limit people that had not had the opportunity to speak about their experience, right? And we're now finally starting to do so through art, to then say, no, art must speak for itself, right? It's more about form. It's not about a personal narrative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's hard to escape that. There's always going to be somewhat of a personal narrative, within what someone makes or, where they live or, anything. And I think trying to extract something outside of life or outside of somebody's roots or, outside of things. It's just not the way everything works. There's so many multiplicities in what anyone makes, as simple as it is, or as how someone just wants you to experience it in a visual way. You're still going to be coming at it with certain histories that it's relating to, you know.
Mhm. Yes, and I think that with your work and why it's so captivating is because it, the abstract compositions do embody histories and memories, and I think that really resonates in the work, and how abstraction offers this potential to capture experience in a way that representation sometimes limits, right?
Mhm.
And how it can embody more abstract memories, because as time goes on our memories do become more abstract, right? And it's sometimes difficult to reconstruct them in a representational manner. um, I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you about color as well, and whether your use of color is intuitive, or if those colors are rooted in the patterns and compositions that you reference.
I've always been, into color. Maybe it's that light and that energy that comes from color. I used to try to not believe that was essential when anyone would say like, "Oh, you're very colorful" or something like that. I was like, "No, no, it's not. It's not about color." But then I guess I started to give myself more permissions when I was done with school of like, well, it is about color. There is this thing that I have with color. So it is very intuitive. Um, it does for me seem like it comes from an intensity of energy, like the way the little bug flies into the light, like it has this sort of light and energy. Um, and at certain times, I really embrace the bright colors, using the pieces as environments or as backdrops and performances, as a way to like be seen at a distance, transform with the different light that's in the music venue or the space, and kind of have that that sort of visual or vibrational analog to the sound that's going on in the performance. So I just gravitate towards it, and I definitely have a mysterious relationship with using sound, with using color, and I think it's just part of my language structure when I make things.
Mhm. I'm curious, you've mentioned, the pieces being a backdrop to the performances. I wonder, would you ever think of the performances as being backdrops for the pieces?
Yeah, it could be because because that of that experience, like you're listening and you're looking. Um, but I've always thought of them as like creating a physical space. So I guess that's
Hmm.
where the backdrop came from. At some points, I stopped saying backdrop and I started saying like they accompany in some way. And I have used them on the floor on some performances, especially like outside ones where there was no way to hook it to anything, and just like put them right on the ground, like as long as they're like here and with us and like gathering and absorbing like that experience and that history and those vibrations of that particular time. Um, so I like thinking about them and switching what they're used for and what comes first or what comes second or what comes through what. And that's
Yeah.
one of the ways we started like working on the back of them, was to think that why should there be one front or one back? And I started to, add fabrics on the back and silk screen. And in these works, I've let the stitching be seen on the backs, and I've painted some of the string. And then I added some hooks at the top of the bar, the wood bar, to then like hang these like small little pieces of fabrics I put together. I also like sewed little mirrors and bells on the back. I mean, on these strips that then I connected to the back. Um, so yeah, just like what's the front, what's the back, what's the foreground, like what comes first. I like how those things can switch.
I loved focusing on the pieces as during the performance, and the sound became the backdrop for me. And I really I didn't do it, but I wanted to get up and walk around and touch the pieces. And I'm also wondering what role tactility plays in the work, because obviously you're engaging with the work physically, but do you would you welcome viewers to touch it? I mean, some of the works are accessible to touch just in terms of their positioning, while others are too high. Yeah, how do you think of that?
Yeah, I like the idea of touch. I've always liked the idea of like of braille, how you can like touch something, like some
Mhm.
kind of physical texture can give you an idea of meaning. And I've always been fascinated also like with the vinyl album and how it has these grooves and how at some point people figured out how to make these grooves where we could put a sharp needle on there and spin it and we can hear recorded sounds. And so I think there's a lot to explore there, which I think kind of our digitized life might take us away from these tactile possibilities. There's probably so many other ways in which we can just like put memory and put experience, put sound, put something into a texture, which then we could read through our body. And so, yeah, I do welcome the idea of sometime like creating something that is meant for that, and maybe thinking of that timing of the touch of like when you go over these certain moments of texture and how that can, give different impressions and meanings.
Yeah. I I always think about that, the record and the needle, and I've never understood how that works. It's so incredible. Somehow I understand how a digital audio file works better than the physical record. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so mysterious. It's this
You
certain
probably,
moments in technology where we just like changed, but we could have kept going textural. Now we're push button.
yeah. Yeah.
But maybe we'll go back to that.
I feel that I'm sensing a return to the analog. I feel like people are starting to buy analog cameras again, buying records. I mean, people never really stopped buying records, but slowly leaving social media. I see more, even my students, I see that more and more people have notebooks. Um, and also their excitement about um, physical engagement, and even just being in the classroom versus being in a Zoom room. Here we are.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm joking.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's definitely something that's encroaching and encroaching more on our sense of time and our sense of relationship to the physical world around us, to materiality, to using our hands, to being with people. And when I started making these pieces that were, so large in my studio, they take a lot of time. And I like the idea that I could get away from my computer, I could um, get away from all the sort of digital, sort of flat sort of surfaces and like get into working with my hands and get into materiality and get into like um that sort of connection between when you're thinking and you're remembering and you're doing at the same time, and how you can form like different relationships between your memory and between your day and between like your whole sense of time through the tactility. I also, wanted the pieces to be used in a real life gathering, like just I was so happy with the idea that, you have to be around them to like, they have to like create this sort of space of like gatherings, like really experience what they are. Um, it's more about being with them in the real time versus the virtual time with that kind of scale. Just doesn't really, translate the same way without having the physical, body in the space.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think that people are noticing that more and more, and just our ownership of our sense of time and ways to get around it and ways to like navigate how to restrict ourselves from not going down the rabbit hole of like wasting our whole day or our time, on one thing or another, on our computer or our phones.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't wait to spend more time with the work, and I'm actually bringing my students on April 2nd in
Oh, that's
Robin.
wonderful. Oh, I'm so glad.
So I'm really excited for that and to share your work with them. My last question to you, Lisa, is what are you most excited about coming up? I'm hoping that you're going to get some rest after this big project.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of things that I'm going to be working on coming up. I'm working on doing a residency at the Fabric Workshop in
Oh yeah,
Philadelphia,
that's yeah.
which is just such an amazing place. And the team there is just so incredible. And so yeah, I'm really excited about that. And I also have an upcoming solo exhibition that will open this October at the Joslin Museum in Omaha. So I'm gonna get brewing on that. Soon, Natural Information Society is gonna play at the MCA here in town with some Stan Brakhage films. So we're thinking about some new music, different approaches to like playing with that film and that paint that's like moving. Um, and so yeah, there's a lot of things to look forward to. Also, I'm going to be back in the show on the last day, um, April 12th, I believe. We're going to do like a family event where me and Joshua are going to play a duo and like kids can run wild and dance and anyone can come, just come and dance in the space and be in the light. It will be an afternoon program. So I'm really looking forward to being back and experiencing the show again. There's something about the kitchen that's just like the perfect place for my work, being a place that has such a history and an awareness of how to treat sound and such
Mhm.
an amazing history with visual art. And to bring like both of those things together is like it's like bringing my home or like bringing the world that these works come from, and not like extracting any level or part of my work. It's just like a place where all of those connections can come together in a strong form. So I'm
Mhm.
really happy about this show, and I hope people can go check it out. I'm happy you're bringing your students.
Yes, I've been telling everyone. Um, that's all so exciting and beautiful hearing you talk about the kitchen in particular. I mean, I'm a big fan. I think I've seen every show since they've been at Westbeth.
Mm,
Lisa, thank you so much for this conversation. I think we're going to open it up to questions now, but I'm so grateful to you and congratulations again.
thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Ksenia. That was absolutely luminous. I really enjoyed listening to you, and congratulations again, Lisa, on this exhibition. And I see the kitchen team here. Congratulations to the kitchen team and to Robin on this really beautiful show. Um, we are going to open it up to questions now. I have a few ready to go, but if you have not asked your question yet, there's still time to submit it at the link in the chat. We would love your questions. Lisa, I'm going to ask the first question. I am curious how you think about your work. If you think, at times you've hinted at this throughout the conversation, but I'm curious to hear you talk about it. Do you think about them as collectives, as groupings of pieces that go together as a constellation, or do you think about them as individual experiences, or both? Does it illuminate itself during the process?
I do kind of think of them a little bit of both, but they are a sort of set of this moment in time, this moment in my home studio where I'm making these pieces and I'm thinking about this particular space. I'm thinking about what's happening in the world at that moment. And I'm thinking about how the works can create a space and create an environment for for sound, for music, but for people and for like creating a certain energy. So I do kind of see them as this moment in time. My pieces also are like slow. They come about in this very slow process. They take a lot of time. So when I have a collection of them done at once, they have a relationship to each other because it's going to be some time before I have another like full set. They're always related to the last pieces that I made. Um, but because they're so big, and yes, they are a one experience, we're like a one body in the space, seeing the piece. So they are their own individual experiences as well. But I would hope that they could also like create and change the entire space too.
Thank you for answering that question, Lisa. The next question is from Magley. They are experiencing a fire drill currently, so I'm going to ask on their behalf. They are wondering if your visual arts practice came before your music practice, which came first?
Oh yeah, visual art definitely came before music. I always loved music and was a collector of music. My parents liked music. I would go out to hear live music when I was a child, and then as I got older. Um, when I was in high school, I started to like branch out into hearing folk musics and like jazz and experimental music. And and it was different than my other friends. They were not interested in weird music. So I ended up having a lot of friends that were musicians or people that were really into music because that was kind of their expertise. So no, over time it seemed necessary for me to start, living in this sort of musical life and environment. It seemed like necessary for me to experiment with that. And yeah, I've always was interested in like the accordion. There's a lot of accordion players where I'm from, and um, and the harmonium just was like a natural sort of connection to the accordion, having a like the bellows, having this like long breath. Um, yeah, it made sense to me, and for me, it related me back to painting and related me back to like translucent layers of color that like go over the like wash over the whole space. So definitely visual art came before the music, but now I'm doing both.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that answer. GE in the audience is curious if you think of the repetitions in the cycles you're addressing as Janus faced, with one face presenting transcendence and the other face representing the monotony of evil and wonder in life.
Um, I guess I don't think of it like so specifically like that. It's much more open and organic. I think about just like the way that we can see with our own eyes the opposites around us in nature and around like from day to night, inward breath, outward breath. So I come to like opposites and differences from my own experience in my body and my own experience in the natural environment. And I don't really put like good or evil on anything. Um, so yeah.
Thank you for that answer, Lisa. I think that's going to conclude the Q&A today. So with that, I am going to play an excerpt from a song of yours, and I wondered if you wanted to introduce it before I play it.
Yeah, we're going to hear In Memories Prism from the 2019 album Mandatory Reality. It's a Natural Information Society album that was recorded in one take with 8 musicians. And we performed this the last 2 nights over the weekend. We performed the entire album. And it's not an easy one to perform because it takes that many musicians. So yeah, it was an amazing experience to perform it. And I thought it would only be fitting to play some of that here.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing that excerpt with us. And yeah, thank you again for this absolutely wonderful conversation today between you and Ksenia. Thank you to the whole team at the kitchen for all of your support in preparing for today and providing those beautiful images for us to look at of the show. And I hope that if you're in New York at some point before mid-April, that you get a chance to go see this show in person at Westbeth. And I want to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor the New Social Environment and make conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you'll be able to watch this shortly on YouTube. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our work. You can do that through the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Dean Spade, hosted by Jill H. Cassett, on Dean's recent publication, Love in a Fucked Up World. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today. And thank you so, so much to Lisa and Ksenia.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Ksenia.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank
Thank you,
Thank you,
Ksenia.
Ksenia.
Great job.
Wow.
Thank
you.
you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. This show.
Go see the show, everybody.
Show.